Let me get one thing straight before we start. The cheapest new car ever sold with a Mercedes badge on the nose had 41 horsepower, weighed about as much as a wet sofa, and could tip over if you looked at it funny. And it wasn't even the strangest thing a luxury brand has ever done to chase a budget buyer. So here's the question. What happens when a company that built its name on straight six limousines and Le Mans trophies decides it needs to sell you an entry-level luxury car for the price of a used van? Do you get a small slice of greatness, or do you get a Fiat with a fancy grille? Because the budget premium car has been tried 9 different ways by 9 different companies, and today we're going through every one of them, from the mildly embarrassing to the genuinely brilliant. Stick around, because the last few are cars people now pay real money to own. Let's start with the one that made the whole world uncomfortable. The Mercedes-Benz A-Class W168 launched in 1997. Mercedes had spent the previous decade building the W124 and the W140 S-Class. Cars so over-engineered that the company reportedly lost money on them. Then they turned around and built a 3.6-meter tallboy hatchback aimed squarely at the Volkswagen Golf, priced from around 29,000 Deutschmarks in Germany. The engineering was genuinely clever. Mercedes used what they called the sandwich floor, a double-layer platform where the engine and gearbox sat at a steep angle so that in a heavy frontal crash, the whole powertrain would slide underneath the cabin instead of into your knees. That gave them crash safety in a car barely longer than a Renault Clio. And then, a Swedish journalist rolled one over during a lane change test in October 1997, and the entire launch turned into one of the most expensive PR disasters in the company's history. Mercedes initially pushed back, then stopped production, recalled the cars, fitted the electronic stability program as standard across the range, and reportedly spent around 300 million Deutschmarks fixing it. The base 1.4-liter made 82 horsepower. The interior was a symphony of grey plastic that felt about as premium as a bus shelter. But here's the thing. The ESP fix worked, the sandwich floor idea carried on into the B-Class, and Mercedes had proved a luxury brand could sell a small car in enormous numbers. They shifted over 1.1 million of them. Our next entry did the same trick, but 15 years earlier and with far better bones. Because before the A-Class, there was the Mercedes 190, the W201, which arrived in 1982 and got immediately nicknamed the Baby Benz. Now, calling this a cheap car feels almost rude today, because the W201 was built like a bank vault with a 5-link rear axle that Mercedes engineers reportedly spent years and enormous sums developing. But at launch, the 190 with the 2.0-liter 4-cylinder made 90 horsepower and took over 14 seconds to reach 100 kilometers an hour. There was no power steering as standard in some markets. The base cars came with hubcaps that looked borrowed from a delivery van. The point is that Mercedes did entry-level properly here. They didn't cheapen the structure. They just gave you less of everything. Less power, fewer toys, thinner carpet. That same 190 shell, with Cosworth's 16-valve head bolted on, became the 190E 2.316 that lapped Nardo for 50,000 kilometers at an average of over 247 kilometers an hour in 1983. Same cheap car, wildly different outcome. And when the W201 was replaced in 1993, Mercedes renamed the whole idea. The W202 C-Class picked up exactly where the 190 left off, kept the multi-link rear suspension, and turned the Baby Benz into the best-selling Mercedes line on the planet. That's the entry-level experiment paying off over 3 decades. Our next pick is where things get genuinely cynical. I'm talking about the Cadillac Cimarron. sold from 1981 to 1988, and widely accepted as one of the worst decisions General Motors ever made. Cadillac needed a small, economical car fast, so they took the GMJ body, the same platform under the Chevrolet Cavalier, and gave it a grille, some badges, and standard alloy wheels. The launch car had a 1.8-liter four-cylinder, making 88 horsepower, a 4-speed manual gearbox, and a price of around $12,131, which was roughly double what a Cavalier cost. Customers noticed immediately because the door pressings, the glass, the dashboard architecture, and the roofline were all visibly shared. John Howell, a Cadillac product planner at the time, later said something close to, "I kept a picture of a Cimarron on my wall with the caption, 'Lest we forget.'" Bob Lutz reportedly described the whole exercise as putting Cadillac badges on a Chevy. Cadillac sold about 132,000 of them across 7 model years, which sounds fine until you learn the Cavalier sold that many in roughly 6 months. The Cimarron did more damage to Cadillac's reputation than any single car in the company's history, and it took them until the CTS in 2002 to properly recover. Our next one is cheap in a completely different way, because it was cheap on purpose and the customers loved it. The BMW 3 Series Compact, the E36/5, launched in 1994. BMW cut the boot off, an E36 3 Series, shortened the wheelbase slightly, and crucially, used the older E30's semi-trailing arm rear suspension underneath because it was cheaper and took up less space. Purists screamed. BMW didn't care because the 316ei Compact started at around 29,500 Deutschmarks and gave people a rear-wheel drive BMW for hatchback money. The base 316i had a 1.6-liter, making 102 horsepower, a weight of about 1,175 kilograms, and an interior with enough hard black plastic to build a small dinghy. It was slow. The 1.9-liter 318Ti with the M44 engine and 140 horsepower was the sweet spot, and with a limited slip differential fitted, it turned out to be more fun than a clown fight in a bouncy castle. BMW built well over 300,000 of them, and you can still find them cheap today, which is why the E36 Compact has become the default cheap drift car in half of Europe. Now, if the Compact was BMW doing budget with dignity, our next pick is a premium brand doing budget with a hammer. Say hello to the Jaguar X-Type of 2001. Ford owned Jaguar at the time, and Ford wanted volume, so the X-Type was built on a modified version of the Ford Mondeo platform at the Halewood plant on Merseyside. Jaguar's engineers did a lot of work to it, adding all-wheel drive as standard at launch with a rearward torque bias and fitting V6 engines exclusively at first. The 2.1-liter V6 version, added in 2002 to hit a lower price, made 157 horsepower and was front-wheel drive only. That's the version that hurt. A front-wheel drive Jaguar with a Mondeo dashboard hiding under the walnut, starting at around £22,000. Jaguar had projected around 100,000 sales a year. They managed roughly 350,000 across 8 years total. The estate version, launched in 2004, was actually a genuinely handsome car, and the 2.2-liter diesel was decent, but the damage was done. Ford took a reported write-down running into billions on Jaguar's operations, and the X-Type is a big part of why. Our next pick is smaller, weirder, and somehow more expensive than it had any right to be. The Smart Fortwo, which sat under the Mercedes umbrella from the start, and specifically the original W450 of 1998. This was the car I mentioned in the opening. The base Fortwo used a 599 cubic centimeter 3-cylinder Suprex engine mounted in the back, making 41 horsepower in the lowest output form, driving the rear wheels through a 6-speed, sequential automated manual gearbox that shifted with all the urgency of a man deciding what to order for lunch. It weighed around 730 kilograms and was 2.5 meters long. Here's the thing everyone forgets. It wasn't cheap. In Britain, the Fortwo launched at over £6,000, and by the time you'd added anything, you were in Ford Fiesta money for a car with 2 seats and no boot. And like the A-Class, it had a stability problem. Early prototypes reportedly flunked the ELK test too, and Mercedes fitted the Trust Plus stability system as standard before launch. The Tritium safety cell, that exposed steel frame in a contrasting color, was a genuinely good idea, and it's the reason a Fortwo can survive impacts that should have folded it. Over 1.7 million of the things were built across all generations. Our next entry is the one where a premium brand got it completely right. The Audi A2 sold from 1999 to 2005. Audi built the body from aluminium using their Audi space frame technology, the same basic idea as the A8. That gave the A2 a curb weight starting under 900 kilograms for some versions. And then they built the 1.2 TDI 3-cylinder version, which had a 61 horsepower diesel, a 5-speed automated manual, low rolling resistance tires, a partially covered radiator grille, and a claimed fuel consumption of 3 liters per 100 kilometers. That's 94 miles per imperial gallon. In 1999, the A2 also didn't have a proper bonnet. To save weight and encourage people to leave servicing to the dealer, Audi fitted a small flap in the grille where you checked the oil and topped up the washer fluid. You had to remove the entire nose section to reach the engine. Audi reportedly lost money on everyone, sold about 176,000 in 6 years, and killed it. Today, clean 1.2 TDIs are collector cars. Roughly 6,500 of them were built, and the aluminium bodies simply do not rust, so they're still around. That brings us to a car that did the same job for a lot less money and a lot more noise. The Alfa Romeo Mito of 2008, built on a platform shared with the Fiat Grande Punto. The entry-level cars, particularly the 1.4-liter, naturally aspirated version with 78 horsepower, were slow enough that overtaking required forward planning and a written risk assessment. The interior had some genuinely lovely touches, that deep-set instrument binnacle and the optional Alfa red leather, sitting right next to switchgear that felt like it came out of a washing machine. But the Mito gave you Alfa's DNA system, the first mass-market use of that 3-mode drive selector, and later, the 1.4 multi-air turbo engines with 135 or 170 horsepower that were genuinely good. The Quadrifoglio Verde version made 170 horsepower from 1.4 liters in 2010, which was remarkable output for the time. Alfa sold roughly 300,000 Mitos over 11 years, which by Alfa standards counts as a triumph. Our final pick is the cheapest car any premium brand has ever sold in serious numbers, and it's the one that shows how this is supposed to work. The mini hatch, the R50, launched in 2001 under BMW ownership. The base one had a 1.6-liter Tritec engine, built in Brazil in a joint venture with Chrysler, making 90 horsepower, and it started at around £10,300. That was Ford Focus money. What you got for it was a car with a wheel at each absolute corner, quick electric power steering, and a chassis so good that motoring journalists spent a decade running out of ways to describe it. The base one was the slow one, taking around 10.9 seconds to 100 kilometers an hour, and the interior plastics on early cars were reportedly a common warranty complaint. The CVT gearbox option was by most accounts best avoided entirely, But BMW had spotted something the Cadillac Cimarron people never did. If you're going to sell a cheap car with a premium badge, the cheap car has to be good at something the expensive cars aren't. The Mini was smaller, sharper, and more entertaining than any BMW. It wasn't a discount 3 Series, it was its own thing. BMW has now built over 5 million of them. And before we finish, there's one more car that proves badge engineering can work, and the Americans figured it out before anyone. The Lexus ES launched in 1989 alongside the LS 400. The ES 250 was, underneath, a Toyota Camry with a V6, and the ES 300 that followed in 1991 was built on the Camry platform too, at the same Japanese factories. On paper, that's the Cimarron formula exactly. But Toyota did the opposite of what GM did. They started with a car that was already excellent, then added better sound deadening, softer damping, real wood, and a level of build quality that reportedly humiliated the Germans. Nobody complained about the shared parts because the Camry wasn't an embarrassment to be associated with. The ES has now sold over 3 million units worldwide, and it's still in production. Same trick, completely different result. So which one would you actually have? I'd take an Audi A2 1.2T Di, closed off grille and all, because 94 miles per gallon in 1999 still amazes me. What story about cars do you want me to cover next? Let me know in the comments, and remember to subscribe and hit like if you enjoyed this video.